Hi guys!
Today we are going to discuss modern discus throwing and ancient Greek discus throwing. There's a lot of variety in the culture, technique, and purpose of discus throwing throughout time.
Facts. We will also practice an ancient throwing technique and a modern throwing technique and discuss the effectiveness of each at the end. To begin, let's go back to ancient Rome. Discus throwing was the third event in the pentathlon. According to Britannica, Pan-Hellenic pentathlon events consisted of a foot race, long jump, discus throw, javelin throw, and finally a wrestling match between the two most successful athletes in the prior events. The discus throw differed from other components of the pentathlon because it did not directly correlate to skills used in everyday life. This shows that discus competitions were held in pure competitive nature. Furthermore, the event was discussed in many notable epics, including by Homer, indicating its significance to Greek culture. Oftentimes, these discus competitions had religious significance. Many athletes would have their discus inscribed and dedicated to a god in hopes of a successful competition. In Pan-Hellenic festivals, the discus was commonly made of stone or clay. In later periods, bronze, lead, and iron discoi were more common. Depending on the festival, athletes may compete fully clad in armor, wrapped in a toga, or naked. Pentathlon athletes were seen as being in peak physical condition and were often highly regarded as elites in both Greek and Roman societies.
In today's time, discus is not nearly as popular as it was in ancient Greece. Discus throwers can now be found on the track teams of high schools and colleges or on the big stage at the Olympics. The rims of discus now are normally made out of metal, but the material of the interior varies from many different materials, including plastic, fiberglass, or carbon fiber. For the Olympics, the men's discus weight is 2 kilograms and the women's Olympic discus weight is 1 kilogram. The only other equipment that a modern discus thrower would need is good throwing shoes. These can be found at many athletic and track stores such as Nike or Adidas. Famous discus throwers include Valerie Ullman, who has won 2 Olympic gold medals for the US, and Mikolas Elana, who is the current men's world record holder with a throw of 74.35 meters or 243 feet and 11 inches.
Ancient discus throwing looks similar to modern competition but utilized a more simple technique. Before we discuss this, it is important to note that ancient discus varied greatly in size and weight. According to Pausanias, the diameter of a discus varied from 17 to 35 centimeters and the weight ranged from 1.3 to 6.6 kilograms. Although this number itself is not significant, these inconsistencies in size and weight would lead to different results even if the same technique was used. The technique itself, for a right-handed thrower, begins with the right foot staggered in front of the left. This is known as the power position today and is derived from this ancient technique. The thrower will wind up their arm to build momentum. The left arm is brought back in what is known as a block, creating as much torque as possible. The thrower will drive through their hips and chest and swing the discus around with the right arm, attempting to get as much distance as possible.
In contrast, modern discus has a much more complicated technique. Instead of standing in place and twisting to use torque, modern discus throwers use the whole ring to generate more momentum and torque by spinning. This technique is known as rotational by throwers of today. The thrower starts at the back of the ring facing away from the center while balancing on their toes, feet a little wider than hip distance apart. Then the thrower begins to do an arm windup by bringing the discus back as far behind them as they can while holding the other arm out in front of them. As the thrower moves on to the next step, the left arm should be in line with the left leg as the thrower opens up to the side. The thrower then pops their hip to the left as well, which allows them to swing their leg towards the center of the circle while continuing to keep their chest and arms up. When the right foot lands at the center of the circle, the upper body should be twisted to the right and the lower body should be twisted to the left, building more torque. Then the thrower will continue their momentum and turn on that right leg into the power position. This power position is what the ancient Greeks used to throw with, but with the more modern technique, we now have so much more momentum going into it. Once the thrower gets into the power position, they can now open up towards the throwing area and block with their left arm, drive with their chest, and let the discus spin off their fingers at a 45-degree angle.
All in all, I really was too cold to try either of the techniques. I couldn't feel my fingers and my hands were not really big enough to hold the disc, so here's a picture of the frozen lake. I was pretty frozen as well.
As someone with experienced discus throwing, I took this a little more seriously. My final conclusion about this comparison is that although the power position that the Greeks used was a lot simpler and less technical, it ultimately doesn't send the discus as far. On the other hand, the more modern technique is way more complicated and harder to learn, but it helps a significant amount in getting more distance for your throws. We decided that we didn't need to measure the distances that each discus was thrown for the comparison because the results are already so evident.
Even though I couldn't move at the end, I did enjoy learning about discus throwing and the differences in the culture and technique throughout time. Thank you for attempting to help me learn.
Of course. It was great for me to finally get back to throwing discus for the first time in like 7 months. And overall, it was really cool to learn more about the sport that I love.
Thank y'all for watching!